congregation for more information about faith and about church. So the format of this evening is we're going to have about a 45-minute talk, and I'll let our speaker be introduced in a moment by Chris. And then we'll have a break. It's just a chance to stretch your legs. I know some of you have sent in questions in advance, but there is some paper and pencils at the back if you want to write down a quick question for John. There's a toilet just over there, and the church hall is also open with the toilets too. So if you do need to go, then just quickly go. And we've got cartons of drink to hand out to you in your seats as well. So it's just a chance to have a stretch. So don't go wandering off, because we want to start promptly after sort of 10 to 15 minutes. I'm not expecting there to be an emergency tonight, but in case we do need to evacuate the building, there's the entrance that you came in at, one just over there, and there's also one just through the door over here. So if you're on this sort of section near the front, then you can get out of the building through this way over here. But if you just wait to be directed, leave by the nearest emergency exit. And if you find steps difficult, please just wait and go out the main exit over there. I think that's everything that I need to say this evening, so I'm going to hand straight over to Chris, who I think actually at this stage we should give a round of applause to, because he's basically put this evening together. So let's give him a round of applause as he comes up.
That's very kind of you. It's always dangerous to be applauded before you've actually done anything, so I hope this will go all right. But it's my pleasure this evening to introduce our speaker to you. Professor John Wyatt, his professional medical background is as a consultant in neonatology. You know what that is. And he combined that together with research into how to prevent and treat brain damage in the most vulnerable young babies. He had over 25 years actually specialized in that area of care for babies. That's his professional background. He's emeritus professor at the University of College London, and he's also a senior researcher at the Faraday Institute for Science and Religion in Cambridge. In parallel to those sort of big professional commitments, he's had a long-standing interest in the emerging ethical and moral and even theological and philosophical areas of science and faith, and the technology that goes with that. And in particular, in recent years, I've been very aware of his work on assisted dying, and he's been very vocal about that subject and very thoughtful about it as well. And of course, very recently has become really interested in our topic of this evening, and that's AI and robotics. And I think it's fair to say a more general interest in those cutting edge areas where science and Christian faith interact. I think throughout all of that work, what's a real feature of John is his care and compassion and human side when addressing what can at times be very sensitive subjects. So that's why it's a particular pleasure to hand over the floor to Professor John Wyatt for his talk on AI and the future of humanity, a Christian perspective. John.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much indeed for that welcome. It's a real privilege for me to be able to come here and to talk about an incredibly important but complex and challenging topic. And to be honest, if you've come expecting some nice, simple, slick, and maybe Christian answers to complicated technological, philosophical, theological problems, you're probably going to be very disappointed, because I haven't got any simple, slick answers. In fact, I don't think there are any simple, slick answers. But I hope together we can think about some of the extraordinary changes that have been taking place in the field of artificial intelligence, and start to look to the future and say, what are the implications? What is it going to mean to us? And I'm going to move quite fast, but as you've heard, after the break, there'll then be time for discussion. It used to be called Q&A, but this is now decided that Q&A is very patronizing, as though you have the questions and I have the answers. So it's now called Q&R, which is question and response. So, and also I will make the slides available as a PDF. I'm sorry I didn't have time to do that beforehand, but I will turn it into a PDF and send it. So please feel free to use that. Just if I perhaps just a mention that some of the images may be copyright, and so don't send the images through the internet, but for your own personal study, that's fine. Okay, so let's see if we can make the technology work. Not at the moment. Could I have the first slide, please? It's a good start. There we go. So on the left is a street in New York, and on the right is what it looked like just 13 years later. It's 1900 and 1913. And what you can see is on the left, it's entirely horse-drawn carriages, and on the right, there is just one horse-drawn carriage, and everything else is mechanized. And that's just an illustration of the extraordinary speed of disruptive technology. Another example, next slide, is digital photography. So the handover from film cameras to digital cameras took place just over a space of a few years. And the reason for showing that is why we should be aware. I suspect we're going to see something like that with AI. We're going to see this kind of extraordinary, rapid, disruptive change in many fields. At the moment, we're just on the beginning of that curve. And of course, nobody can predict the future. It may be there's going to be some massive bust. The whole thing will fail to develop. But my hunch is that there's going to be an enormous disruption in all kinds of areas. A particular interest to me is healthcare and the world of medicine. And I suspect that is one of the areas where we're going to see huge disruption. So next slide, please. So many people have been heralding the remarkable changes in AI as one of the most important developments there's ever been in the history of technology. And people such as Bill Gates. ChatGPT was released just over 2.5 years ago. Next slide. And this graph shows how fast it took off. So Spotify took 150 days to get to 1 million users. Instagram, 75 days. ChatGPT, 5 days to get to 1 million users. There are now over 1 billion users across the planet of people who are using ChatGPT. So this extraordinary spread globally. And ChatGPT is just one of a whole suite of programs, all similar things, now called large language models, a particular kind of artificial intelligence, which is particularly is capable of generating, it's called generative artificial intelligence, and it's capable of generating text at industrial scale. Next slide. If you follow the smart money, this is a prediction of how many billions forecast for the size for generative AI. And in fact, it's likely that these are now underestimates. The size, the way the curve is going up is going fast. If you look at, there are 7 companies in America that are in Silicon Valley. They're called by market traders the Magnificent Seven. And their total market capitalization, that is how much they are worth, is $15 trillion. Just for comparison, what is $1 trillion? Just for comparison, the entire GDP for the UK, the complete amount of financial turnover, is about $3 trillion. So this is 5 times the value as a kind of the UK economy. And that just shows you the amount of money that is pouring into this field and therefore the power that's going on. Next slide. in my own particular area of healthcare, all these different applications of how AI, not all of it generative AI, there are different forms of AI. A lot of AI is basically pattern recognition. It's a very sophisticated way of recognizing patterns. This is being used increasingly, for instance, for assessing diagnostic images in medicine, looking at laboratory reports and so on. But generative AI is also being used increasingly. So for instance, what is now sweeping across the NHS is software which allows doctors and other health professionals to, when they're having a consultation with a patient, instead of having to type in, I'm sure you've had this experience of going to see a doctor and the doctor spends the whole time staring at the screen and never even looks at you, just staring at the screen. Now it's possible to have this conversation face to face, and the conversation is being recorded with the patient's consent and is being then analyzed, converted into text so that there's a complete record of the consultation, but also then for the doctor, a summary with all the necessary investigations that should be carried out. And this is now being rolled out across the NHS. And I think that, for example, in general, is a very positive way of using this technology as a way of actually encouraging the human-to-human relationship and letting the technology do the housekeeping. But there are other examples where, for instance, mental health apps, it's possible to have on your smartphone an app which will basically provide effectively a therapist for you, so you can talk about your feelings, and the smartphone will talk back to you, and it knows you better than you know yourself, and it remembers the previous conversations you've had. And this is being touted as a huge advance in mental health. And interestingly, just to sidestep to that particular issue, what is often said is, of course, ideally, everybody with mental health problems should be able to have a human therapist 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But in reality, that's never going to be possible. And so having a digital therapist is good enough. It's better than nothing. And we can make it available across the world for everybody in the world who has a mental health problem, in whatever language, they will have their own AI therapist. So that's the kind of ethical question. Now, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? What are the pros and cons? Something else which is extraordinary about a smartphone, and this is where pattern recognition comes in. So it's possible to get from the smartphone, the way, as I'm here using this smartphone, and particularly if I was going onto social media or email or so on, by trapping and analyzing the way I am using the smartphone, it's actually possible to work out what my mental health state is. So for instance, it's monitoring the way my voice sounds, it's monitoring the way I use the keyboard, it's actually the way it's monitoring in space. How it's moving is actually a marker of my mental health, the vocabulary that I'm using as I'm typing. And it's possible to then predict the likelihood that I'm about to have a suicide attempt. Obviously a painful subject, and I'm aware that many of us, including myself, have had friends and relatives who've committed suicide, so it's not something to raise lightly. But what would it do if Google or something else could say, somebody who's holding a smartphone in Rustington is at risk of committing suicide? Should we actually send out the paramedics to where that smartphone is? How do we use this kind of information, this extraordinary ability to monitor and to understand what's happening to individuals? Next slide. So healthcare in particular is a very major focus. All the big companies, Google, Apple, Amazon, are putting enormous resources into healthcare. And you know, as a medic, one of the things that often surprises me, even disturbs me, and that is, in central London where I live, if I want to order a particular piece of electronics or something for my laptop. I can go onto a website like Amazon or one of the other big purchasers. Enormously sophisticated AI will select, including robots in warehouses, will select out of millions and millions and millions of possible different appliances. They will select exactly the right one. They will put it into a packet. They will put it into a white van. And sometimes the very same day, someone will appear with a white van and push it through my letterbox. And it works incredibly accurately and very cheaply. And yet, if I want to find the result of a blood test or of an X-ray or something really important that could be life-changing, it turns out, oh, we've lost the form. I'm sorry, we don't seem to be. Could you come back to us tomorrow or maybe next week? Or I think we'll have to do another blood test and so on. So why is it that something that's completely trivial, like computer equipment, works incredibly well, and something that's really important, life and death, like blood tests and the NHS, works really badly? And actually, I think sooner or later, Amazon or someone else is going to take over the NHS, and it's going to be a lot better at one level, but it's going to become a lot more impersonal at another level, because blood tests will be treated exactly the same as any other piece of data. Next slide. So what is interesting to me is that the technology is very new, very flashy, constantly changing and so on. But when we look at the power structures behind what's going on, what you realize is the power structures are very old and very entrenched, very powerful. And it's basically money, and it's the military, the two biggest funders behind all this, both in the US and in China, which are the two major centers in the world. Is a lot of it is capitalism, certainly in the US, and it's market power with this vast amount of venture capital and so on. And it's often said the market is basically all about greed and fear. And it's greed and fear which is driving a huge amount of investment into AI and so on. But then the other factor, which is much less well recognized, but is very important, and that is there's a huge amount of military funding also going into AI. And the reason for this is to try to create, there's an arms race going on with AI, and particularly between China and the US. And so again, it's fear which is driving a lot of unless we get there first, the enemies are going to take us over because their technology is going to sweep the board. Next slide. So Google is creating, and other companies are creating software specifically for doctors, which will, the idea being that you could put the entire patient history and other details into the AI, and the AI will make a diagnosis and a treatment plan. And already these systems are functioning, they're passing postgraduate medical exams, the sort of exams done for people who are already trained doctors who are becoming specialists. And these AI systems are capable of getting a higher mark on average than human beings. And again, it's likely that this is going to become a major factor in the future. We're going to have access to extraordinary levels of expertise. Already some people are typing in their medical history into ChatGPT and seeing what it says. Incidentally, I don't recommend you to do that because the privacy, ChatGPT is using all the data that you type into it, is also used for training advancing systems. So therefore, it's perfectly possible that all your personal medical details, which you've carefully typed in, could be taken up by AI and be incorporated and even revealed in the future. So you have to be very aware of possible privacy concerns when using these systems. Next slide. Yeah, so, sorry, go back one. So there is a great deal of concern about the safety of these systems. As these systems are increasing in power almost every month, there's a great deal of concern about safety. And the UK held back in 23 a conference at Bletchley Park, which was, of course, the site of the Enigma in the Second World War, the code-breaking operation, where leading computer technology of the time was used there. And so the Bletchley Declaration was an attempt to have an agreement, an international agreement, to try to control and limit the development of the most sophisticated systems because of the possibility of potential harm of what they could do. And the Bletchley Declaration came out with 3 levels of risk. Next slide. So it's interesting just to reflect on these 3 areas of risk. One is the risks from the training data. So these systems are trained on huge amounts of data that have been scraped up largely from the internet. And they use that data as a way of then generating the text and the other things that they produce. The problem is that those training data have hidden within them all kinds of biases, which reflect the fallenness of humankind. It reflects the discrimination, prejudice, biases, and all kinds of evil things which lie behind the data. And the worry, therefore, is that the systems inherit the biases that are in the training data and then reproduce them. So just as an example, if you look at statistics for many illnesses, you will find that people who live in really affluent areas, such as Rustington, for example, have much better health outcomes than people who live in very deprived areas in other areas of the country, often inner city areas. And that difference doesn't reflect the fact that you are all very nice people and that people in cities are very nasty people, but it just reflects the discrepancies in healthcare. The problem is that if the system is trained on that data, when someone else comes and types in their data from an inner city population, the system will say, well, you've got a much worse health outcome, and therefore just perpetuating the inadequacies and the failures of the system. So bias is a major problem. Secondly, there's a real risk for malevolent people, evil people, who can use these systems for their own malevolent purposes. And surprise, surprise, there has been a complete epidemic of people taking these sophisticated systems and using them for malign purposes, including stealing money, deep fakes, all kinds of really very evil things. I mean, an extraordinary example was reported of somebody in a quite a senior position in the company, I think it was the finance director, and he was asked to attend a special online meeting, and he came onto the online meeting, and there were the other members of the executive board on the online meeting, and he was instructed to transfer a very large sum of money from the company account into a private account. And he thought this was pretty strange, but that's what the board are saying, and so he did it. It then turned out that all the figures on the screen were actually generated by AI. They were not real. They had managed to reproduce the images of the real people and sound like them. So it just shows the power of the technology, the ability to confuse and persuade. And it's really important for us, therefore, to understand that, if you, for instance, on the screen, see something that looks like your daughter, and your daughter is saying something terrible has happened to me, and will you transfer £10,000 to this account, just be aware of the fact that that could be completely fraudulent, and that you have to be extraordinarily careful about the sophisticated levels of scams that are going on. So the problem with these large language models is that because of their sophistication with language, what they can do is they can persuade. They are extremely sophisticated at using language in a very persuasive way, and also pseudo-intimacy. It seems as though they're incredibly friendly, incredibly open, incredibly intimate, but it's an entirely fraudulent and fake kind of intimacy. Okay, next slide. Yeah, so this is just illustrates the kind of the dark figures who are using this technology. And sadly, there's a geopolitical element to this. It turns out that it's particularly North Korea, Russia, and various other rogue states around the world who are focusing power in using deceptive software. Next slide. And fake videos have been circulating, and I've heard it said that as a prediction, they think it's quite likely that at some stage in the near future, serious armed conflict will erupt somewhere in the globe entirely because of fake videos, where people have been persuaded that something terrible has happened, or their leader is saying something, or whatever. And again, it means that really one cannot trust any video, however realistic it seems, however much you recognize the people involved, you simply cannot trust the accuracy of what's being said. Next slide. So the third level of risk, we talked about, number one is bias, number two is so-called rogue actors, malevolent human beings. The third level of risk is the possibility that these machines themselves will start to take over control. Now, of course, this is a very long-standing science fiction idea of the Terminator and Skynet, and if you know your science fiction, you know that people have been talking about this for decades. But there are many people, including some of the leading AI scientists, who believe there is a realistic possibility that as these systems start to develop their own autonomy, their own ability to act, that it's possible that they will start to work and to take control. And this is called the alignment problem. That how do we know that the values, quote, the intentions, the aims of the machine are aligned with what human values? How do we know that what the machine is trying to do is the same as what we want the machine to do? And what is already apparent is that we can't always trust what the machine tells us it's doing. Surprise, surprise, because these machines have been trained on vast amounts of human deceptive data where humans have been deceiving and twisting and manipulating and all the rest, it turns out that the machines are capable of doing the same, and that therefore you can't always assume that what the machine tells you it's doing, it is actually accurately genuine. And so this is a very major concern at the moment. Just in this last few months, there have been papers published from several of the major companies talking about this alignment problem. And I'm happy to discuss it a bit further if that's something you'd like to talk about later on. Next slide. So one of the extraordinary things about this technology is that there seems to be no physical limit to how powerful these things can become. And that's completely new. So if you're talking about a motor, an engine, then as you make the engine bigger and bigger and more powerful, eventually there comes a point where you simply cannot make it any more powerful. Physics steps in, and it's not possible. And if you're talking about a rocket, as you make the rocket bigger and bigger and bigger, eventually you run into a physical limit where the rocket can no longer be any bigger. But when you're dealing with computer technology, and particularly when you're dealing with ones and zeros, which is basically how computer software works, there doesn't appear to be any physical limit to how powerful these things can be. And that's making quite a lot of people quite worried. Next slide. So this is a picture from, believe it or not, a textbook written by an Oxford professor, Nick Bostrom, which is called Superintelligence. And along this horizontal axis is intelligence. And there's the intelligence of a mouse. There's the intelligence of a chimpanzee. There's the intelligence of a village idiot. Okay, so somebody who is healthy but just not very clever. And there's the intelligence of Einstein. You know, that's just about as intelligent as a human being can be. So all of us in this church are somewhere between these two. We're somewhere between these two. And I leave it to you as to whether you're closer to the village idiot or you're closer to Einstein. Next slide. So what happens when a super intelligent machine turns up over here? Do we think that that super intelligent machine is going to be terribly interested in human beings any more than we're terribly interested in mice or cockroaches or amoeba? And therefore, how do we know that we can be confident that when a super intelligent AI is created, that it's going to take our interest? Next slide. So it's these kind of concerns which is leading many people to worry about what the future would be. And certainly back 18 months or so ago, there was a lot of discussion about a moratorium, putting a hold on the rate of in order to try to have the great and the good discuss, you know, are we confident we're doing the right thing here? Interestingly, all that has been blown out of the water, and I think because of greed and fear, the trajectory continues at an extraordinary pace. Next slide. So, what are the alternatives? Well, some people are suggesting the only way that we can survive is that we must find a way of merging with the machines. Basically, we're never going to be able to compete with these machines. So could we find a way of connecting the human brain to the computer technology so that we could in some way merge? Next slide. And Elon Musk and other people are actually working on, he's created a company called Neuralink, and other people are working on implanting chips into the brain so that they could be connected to computers. And this is a classic example of what's sometimes called dual-use technology, because this kind of technology can be extraordinarily valuable for people who have very severe neurological diseases. So the very first cases in which this technology has been implanted have been people with conditions such as motor neurone disease or spinal paralysis and so on. And the idea that they could actually, just by thought, start to be able to control a computer, so even if they are not able to move physical muscle, this technology could actually be astonishingly liberating for people with very severe conditions. But at the same time, it opens this whole can of worms about, you know, there are many younger people who are thinking this is the future. I'm going to wire myself up to computers so that I can control the computers and I can have experiences which an ordinary human being cannot have. Next slide. And just to make the point that the US military is investing very heavily in this technology, and as the militaries are around the world. And the idea is to try to create an enhanced soldier who will be wired into the military systems, so the soldier doesn't need to stare at a screen, because into their brain they will be receiving the radar images, and they will be able to target the missiles just by thought alone. Next slide. And so there's this kind of, again, science fiction, horrific image of these enhanced soldiers who will go into war, merging with the machines. And the idea is there is enormous fear, particularly about China, and therefore the idea is that China will always have more soldiers than the West can have, but maybe if our soldiers are smarter and have more sophisticated technology, they'll be able to fight back. Next slide. So one of the things that in this whole area, which is so difficult, is trying to understand how much of this is actually just science fiction and how much of it is genuinely reality. And I think the truth is that even experts in the field find it often very difficult to distinguish between how much of this is SF, science, how much of this is real. Interestingly, I do think many of the people who are leading this work, they were all reared in science fiction from their earliest days, and they're actually often quite consciously, they're trying to make the science fiction come true. They're deliberately trying to make what they've read about turn into reality. And there are many examples of that. So the voice of Alexa was designed to be actually exactly the same as the voice of the computer in Star Trek. And there are many other examples where people have deliberately designed their technology to be what science fiction has. Next slide. So, how likely is it that some terrible, malevolent superintelligence is going to be created? Well, the fascinating thing, and this is where we're getting into philosophy, is if you adopt the majority view of most scientists, and what I work with at UCL and so on, about the nature of reality, what they would say is that everything is just physics. Everything is just material mechanisms. What that means, therefore, is that the brain is simply a collection of wiring and different machinery. And as this collection of machinery is whirring, it creates consciousness. It creates everything that we're experiencing in our heads. But this is just whirring of machinery. The fascinating thing is that if you really believe that's true, then you should be very frightened. Why? Well, because just think about all the wonderful things that have come out of the whirring of human brains, and then think about all the terrible, evil things that have come out of whirring human brains. Just think about the horrific history of the human race, the most evil things that human beings have taught us, the sadism, the torture, the malevolence, the evil, all of that has just emerged out of wires and connections inside brains. And therefore, if that's happened in the mush of our brains, why shouldn't it also happen in these sophisticated computers? Why shouldn't we expect there to emerge the most horrific evil people, the Stalins, the Pol Pots, the Putins, will emerge out of these computer technology? You should expect it to happen. It's happened in human brains. Why shouldn't it happen in machine brains? And I think that's a very real question and a very real reason to be fearful. Next slide. I'll come back to that question, but I think another issue in all of this, and that is that we do have this very strong tendency as human beings to anthropomorphize, that is, to see a human form in what is not a human being. We do this all this time with our pets, I'm treading onto dangerous territory here, I'm aware. I'm sure many of you are pet lovers, and yet it's well known that the pets that receive the greatest love and attention are those which physically resemble newborn babies. Because we are drawn towards, we put our humanity into the pet. And exactly the same thing is happening with AI, that people are putting their humanity into what is just clever programming. Next slide. So this tendency to anthropomorphism is universal, but the fascinating thing is it's outside conscious control. We don't choose to say, oh, look at that, isn't that lovely? It actually just happens instantaneously inside our brains, and therefore it renders us open to deception and manipulation. Next slide. And I think what really concerns me is that our lives are going to be increasingly infiltrated by simulated persons. Wherever we go, we're going to be running into simulated persons. They'll be in our workplace, they'll be in our GPs, surgeries, they'll be in our entertainment, they'll be whenever we get contact with a company, with the government, we'll have these friendly, compassionate, empathic, caring voices speaking to us. Many people are having AI companions and are developing, it sounds like science fiction, it actually is true. Millions of people, young people across the world already are having passionate relationships with AI companions who are with them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They know them better than they know themselves. They're always there for them. In fact, they're so much better than human friends. My human friends, sometimes they're just too busy. They don't pick up. They've got their own stuff. I don't want to burden them. But this special friend is with me 24 hours a day, is always there for me, always compassionate, always caring, knows me better than I know myself. Next slide. And so this is called Replica, the AI companion who cares. And there's just one example. There are millions of people around the world using these things. Next slide. You can choose the kind of AI companion. Next slide. Go back one. It's back one, yeah. So this quote from a journalist: human compassion can be gamed. It's the ultimate psychological hack. A glitch in human response that can be exploited in an attempt to make a sticky product. That's why designers give AIs human characteristics in the first place. They want us to like them. So this being drawn into what is really a fake relationship. Next slide. So this is a picture from an American TV series called Westworld. Westworld is based on a science fiction story, and the idea is that somewhere out in the American desert, a incredibly sophisticated game has been created where there are humanoid robots that are so sophisticated you cannot tell that they're not real human beings. And the idea is that real human beings will come to this theme park and they will live out their fantasies with these replicas. And it turns out that the primary thing that human beings want to have with all these humanoid robots is either to have sex with them or to kill them. Because what else would you want to do with a humanoid robot? But so if you want to watch the series, I'll give you an 18 warning, as you can guess what you'll see. But it does raise some extraordinary questions. In one of the early episodes, a human being is arriving for the first time at this theme park. And this beautiful woman meets him and helps him to choose what particular costume he wants to wear, and then asks him, "Is there anything else I can do for you?" And he stares at her and he says, "Are you real?" And she says to him, "If you can't tell, does it matter?" And I think that is a question which is going to haunt us as we go into the next decades. If you can't tell the difference between a genuine human being and an incredibly brilliant replica, if the impact they have on you is exactly the same, does it matter? And there are going to be a lot of people who are going to say, you know what, it doesn't matter. If your elderly relative is confused and lonely, and then she's got this wonderful friend who's totally there for her, and always friendly, and always sympathetic, and knows her better than anyone else, does it matter if it's all just clever programming? There are going to be a lot of people who says, no, it doesn't. As long as she is happy, the fact that it's all clever programming doesn't have a difference. Deep down, I personally think it does matter, because ultimately it's the difference between authenticity and fake. But we're going to have to address that question. If you can't tell the difference, does it matter? Next slide. So, coming to the end, but I want to raise these two big questions which AI is raising. The first is, if we're going to live in this world where there are so many things that we thought were uniquely human, which are now dominated by machines, what does it mean to be human in this world? What is it special about being human? Is it our intelligence? We used to think that the most important thing, or some people used to think the most important thing about human beings was that we were more intelligent than chimpanzees or than other things on the planet. But actually, if that's the case, then we may be looking obsolescence. So that's the first question. What does it mean to be human? The second question is what is the end goal? Where are we headed? What kind of world are we creating? In particular, what kind of world are we trying to create for our children? Is this a world in which we would want to live? Next slide. So what does it mean to be human? And just very, very briefly, next slide. This is the standard narrative. Intelligence is central to what it means to be human. Everything that our civilization has achieved is a product of human intelligence. Next slide. There's no deep difference between what can be achieved by a biological brain and what can be achieved by a computer. It therefore follows that anything that human beings can do, computers will do better. Next slide. And so there's a strange merging between the machines and the humans. As the machines become more like humans, it seems that many humans are becoming more like machines. We become roboticized. We become, in order to fit in. You've probably felt this when you're sometimes trying to negotiate some kind of website or software or have a conversation on the phone with a computer. You have to end up like a machine in order to make this thing understand. So there's this strange sort of dehumanization going on. Next slide. And it's interesting, if you just look at our language, we have language like people being hardwired and programmed and information overload and so on. Next slide. So artificial intelligence is like a distorting mirror. We try to understand what it means to be human. And for many people, particularly young people, it's the AI which seems to be the way of understanding what we are. Next slide. But I think that's an unhelpful way. And what I want to just point out is the difference between saying there are many aspects of the way human beings think which is like a computer. If you like, that's a metaphor. But it's false to say that the brain is a computer. So it's a useful metaphor. The brain may be like a computer in some ways, but the brain is not a computer. That's false. Next slide. And what the Bible says is this extraordinarily well-known verse that the Lord God formed the man, the human, from the dust of the earth and breathed into his nostrils, and the man became a living creature. So in the words of the original Hebrew in Genesis, the word for human, which is Adam, is actually derived from the ground, which is Adamah. So in literal Hebrew, human beings are groundlings. And actually, did you know that the English word human is derived from humus, the compost heap? That's what it means to be human. That's what we are derived of. And yet, what the scriptures say is, in this extraordinary way, God breathes his breath, his spirit, and energizes this being made out of humus, made out of the ground. Next slide. And so, as human beings, we are persons. And I haven't time to go into some of the rich theology here, but the idea of a person is actually, it comes out of Christianity. It comes out of the understanding of the very nature of the Godhead itself, that God is three persons in one nature. And so this idea of being a person is something, to use philosophical language, is ontologically foundational. You cannot define a person in terms of something more basic, more foundational. The lowest level you can get is personhood. Persons are not reducible to matter and energy, and they're not limited to matter and energy. Next slide. And as the early theologians, particularly in the East, the Greek theologians, as they reflected on the nature between the Father and the Son and the Spirit, these three persons, they said, you know, the Father, the most profound thing we know about the first person of the Trinity is that he's called Father. And yet you cannot be a father unless the Son exists. So the very being of the first person of the Trinity depends on the existence of the second. And the very being of the Son depends on the existence of the Father. So the persons are constituted by their relations. You cannot be an isolated person. That's simply an incoherent concept, because persons are constituted in their relations. And then when God makes us as persons, as human persons, we reflect the personhood of God himself. So persons give themselves to the part of what it means to be a person is to be giving yourself to the other, and receiving, giving and receiving love is what reflects the very being of personhood. Next slide. So in Christian thinking, to be a human person, it wonderfully and mysteriously is actually to participate in some sense in the divine life of the triune God, something extraordinarily wonderful and mysterious. Next slide. So whereas Descartes said, I think, therefore I am, cogito ergo sum, a better Christian definition would be, I am loved, or you love me, therefore I am. So our being is constituted by our relations. Okay, next slide. So when we go back to this slide, here is the intelligence dimension along here. But actually, if you look at the vertical, you see there's a different dimension. There's a personhood dimension. Is a mouse a person? No. Is a chimpanzee a person? Not really. Is the village idiot a person? Yes. Is Einstein a person? Yes. Is Einstein more of a person than the village idiot? No. In other words, personhood is not the same as intelligence. It's not the same as processing power. In fact, if you think of some of the stupidest people you know, the fact that they're not very clever doesn't make them any less wonderful or valuable. And by contrast, if you think of the most brilliant, brain-busting person you know, it doesn't make them more of a person. Personhood is something that comes from our very being. And therefore, even if a super intelligent computer was to appear over here, it's not a person. And in that sense, it isn't part of participating in the very being of the triune God. Next slide. And then finally, what is our goal? Where are we aiming for? What kind of world are we trying to create for our children. Next slide. So this is what the technologists think the future world is going to be. We're going to live in this extraordinary digital world. We're going to, everywhere we go, we're going to have this amazing digital reality. Next slide. This is the city of the future. As you can see, the sky is always blue. It's always incredibly beautiful. And there's amazing technology that is anything you want, whatever you want, it's always there instantaneously. Whatever your desires are, technology will give it to you instantaneously. Next slide. So it creates a vision of the future of human enhancement and intelligent machines, and everything is going to be frictionless. The engineers love that word, frictionless. Whatever you want, wham, instantaneously it's there. Next slide. Every desire, every longing, every interest, it's all going to be satisfied. Frustration, struggle, boredom, it's gone. We're going to be free to fulfill our wildest dreams with the minimum of effort. Next slide. But is that a future in which physically embodied human beings made out of meat like us can flourish and find their ultimate purpose and fulfillment? Next slide. So the fascinating thing is, if you look back on your life and you think, where were the times that you really learned things? Where were the times where you grew morally, emotionally, spiritually? And the answer is, I guarantee, it's all to do with resistance. It's all to do with friction, with struggle, with perseverance, with frustration. I'm watching my granddaughter learning to crawl, and the frustration, the reaching out and then rolling over and trying to get there and falling backwards and so on, the constant frustration, and yet that's how we all do it. It's by this constant struggle against a perseverance of pain, of suffering. Next slide. So this is a slide from Wall-E. I don't know whether you recognize this if you saw Wall-E, but this is the future of humanity when the planet's been destroyed by human greed and arrogance, and the remaining humans are in these super cruisers in space where they're being looked after by robots. And this is what happens. And I'm afraid there's a terrible truth about this, that this is the frictionless future that the technologists are creating. And is this a future we want to belong to? Next slide. So the question is, how can powerful technology be redeemed? How can it be brought back from evil possibilities and used to fulfill its amazing potential? I don't want to leave with this just an entirely negative view. There are some astonishing possibilities here, but it needs to be redeemed. It needs to be brought back and used to promote human flourishing and the common good and the good of creation. Next slide. It's fascinating in the Bible that the narrative, the grand narrative of the Bible, it starts in a garden, but it actually ends in a city, a garden city, the New Jerusalem. And a city is a product of human technology. So actually, I think there are hints in the scriptures that in some way our technology can be redeemed, the very best of technology. It says in Revelation that the honor and the glory of the nations, and those are the pagan nations, will be brought into the New Jerusalem. Maybe some of that honor and glory will actually be the very best of technology, which is redeemed and brought into the new heaven and the new earth. It's that speculation, but it'd be interesting to think about it. Next slide. So, preliminary responses. I think critical vigilance. We need to try to understand the signs of the times. I don't want to be patronizing, but can I say, it's great that you're here. It's great that you're interested. It's great that you want to think about these things. Let's keep being engaged. This is not going to go away. This is going to affect your lives. It's going to affect the lives of your children. It's going to affect the lives of your grandchildren. We need to be better educated and informed. Next slide. I think we need to try and resource and support workers in the tech industry. There are many people who are working in the tech industry. They're either believers or they're people of goodwill. They don't want their best efforts to be used for destructive, damaging, diabolical reasons. They want to see it being redeemed. They want to see it being used for good. We need to find opportunities for co-belligerence, finding other people who are also interested in the same things and trying to use pressure to exert on the companies. Next slide. And if at the end of all this you're tempted to fear, as I am, I want to remind myself and remind you of this phrase which occurs more than 100 times in the scriptures. God wouldn't keep saying this to us if we weren't tempted to be afraid. Why does God keep saying, don't be afraid, don't be afraid, don't be afraid? We can be confident that God's sovereign purposes are being worked out, and we are called to be bit players in the great drama. Next slide. So I'll finish there. There are some books at the back. That I edited this book and written some chapters. The Robot Will See You Now. Next slide. I have a podcast, if you're interested. It's my son, who's a professional journalist. We do it once a week. It's called Matters of Life and Death. If you have a smartphone, you'll have a podcast app. If you go onto your podcast app and type in Matters of Life and Death, you can receive the podcast every week. Next slide. I have a number of other books which are also at the back. And next slide. I have a website, johnwyatt.com, and there are more resources there if you're interested. Thanks so much for listening.
Yes, okay, so we'll start the question and response section. I should just say we were a little bit short of time on the books, so the bookstore will be open when we finish this section. So if you're interested in John's books, please do come over afterwards, and we'll be over there with the card reader or cash. So thank you very much for the questions. There's quite a few questions that we'll get through as many as we can. I don't know if we'll get through all of them, but let me start by asking one. So I thought, if we didn't get any questions this evening, the best place to start would be ChatGPT. So I just typed, having actually this afternoon,
Really, here you are. You expect the people in control of the questions at least to do some of their own work. And what does he do? He just types it into chat.
Well, I did get a bit of AI this afternoon. I got a message on my phone saying, we thought you might be interested in a new dress. But I realise I share an email with my wife. So anyway, I just put into ChatGPT, I'm going to a talk by Professor John Wyatt. What question should I ask this evening?
You're a fraud. What do you know about AI?
And it came up with several really penetrating questions, but the one I thought was, maybe we'll just kick off with this and then we'll go to real people. Do you believe AI will eventually challenge the very notion of what it means to be human, especially in terms of creativity, decision-making, and empathy?
Wow.
Should we ask ChatGPT?
Yeah, we should ask him for the answer, shouldn't we?
Yeah.
Just incidentally, people are working on, I forgot what it's called, some kind of cheat software, and the idea is that you have an earbud and you have something in your glasses, and literally it will give you the answers. If you go to an interview or anything like that, it will be giving you the answers into your earbud. So I've just put my earbud in to get the answers. So is it challenging what it means to be human? Well, I think it is. And I think that's one of the fascinating things about this time, because that question, what does it mean to be human, for most of human history, it's just the kind of thing that philosophers and people nobody seriously questioned that. Ordinary people never thought about what it means to be human. And I think for the first time, when you're confronted with this, I don't know how many people have had that kind of experience. I've had the kind of experience when typing into, not ChatGPT, but some other systems, a kind of almost sinking feeling in the pit of the stomach, because this is so good. This is so convincing. And also that it can seem to be remarkably compassionate. So there was a study where they compared real human doctors with AI in terms of conveying a diagnosis, a particularly a difficult diagnosis like cancer. And it was blinded, and they asked the patients which they prefer, and overwhelmingly they preferred the AI. It was much more sensitive, much more compassionate, much more carefully delivered and thoughtful in the way. So I think it is a very confusing time that we're living in, and I think that if you take something like creativity, that's a very debatable and controversial issue, because at first glance you would say, not real creativity. Now, creativity, genuine creativity, is something that only human beings can do. And yet when you look at the kind of products of what the best programs are now capable of doing, in terms of images, in terms of music, in terms of video, extraordinary things. And it's certainly as good as 95% of human beings. Okay, there's probably, there are a few Mozarts and there are a few Rembrandts and whatever their modern day equivalents are, but for most of us, ordinary Joe human beings, it does seem that these machines are able to do as well as most of us can, at least in certain areas, and they're only going to get better. So it does raise this kind of question, what does it mean to be human? What is at the heart of our humanity? And what are human beings for? And if you're a Christian or a religious believer, why has God created us? What are we for? And I do think these are questions which we can't escape. And that's part of the fascinating thing, that part of the world that we have. And the very fact that so many people are here suggests that quite a lot of people are also interested in these questions and what it's going to mean for the future of humanity. And certainly I look at my grandchildren and I wonder what kind of world will they have to navigate. Interestingly, so I think when it comes to the life of the mind, intellectual, creative, and those kind of things, I suspect increasingly the machines will do as well as human beings do. Interestingly, the things the machines can't do is be physical, be embodied, and do face-to-face relationships. And I suspect that that's going to become more and more important in the future. There used to be the campaign for real ale. I suspect we're going to have a campaign for real humanity. And actually, I do think that churches and Christian communities can be one of those places which really believe in real humanity. I mean, it's fascinating to me that the central worship of Christian religion, which is the Eucharist, the Holy Communion, can only be done physically. There's no way that you can ask ChatGPT to participate in the communion, to celebrate communion. And I think that, therefore, that embodiment. And 2,000 years ago, so one of the things that AI engineers talk a lot about is they talk about meat bags. Do you know that you're a meat bag? And in this very kind of demeaning way about what it means to be human. And they talk about meat children. Do you know our meat children? They're always going to be limited and useless and pathetic and messy, wet software, useless. I mean, making things out of jelly is never going to work. Well, in contrast, they say, but the machines. Even some of them talk about our mind children. Our mind children are the machines that we're going to make. Well, 2,000 years ago, the Apostle John was writing at the beginning of his gospel, and he wrote in the literal Greek, the word became meat. God himself turned himself into meat. That's the extraordinary, scandalous thing that Christianity says, the incarnation. And I think we can see a new relevance of the incarnation, because what Christianity teaches is that meat matters. Bodies made of meat are what he loves, what he cares for, what he died for. He didn't die for machines. He died for human beings like us.
Thank you. I'm sure it'll revise its question. So there are a couple of questions I'll link together, which I'm paraphrasing slightly. So one person said that they're starting to use, and we should say this, ChatGPT generating text and this sort of thing from requests that you put into it. So that person said they're starting to use that. Their letter writing is kind of more difficult. So they're using that ChatGPT to write letters. But the question arose whether that leads to a loss of skills. So are we at risk of losing important skills because of reliance on machines? And related to that, I suppose, was a question about whether jobs are being put at risk. I think that's come up a couple of times, whether there's a risk that people will lose their employment because of AI.
Yes, so this business about what using these machines actually does to us is a very, very important and very troubling issue. So I used to be really interested in maps. I love Ordnance Survey maps, and I love navigating and working out how to planning journeys and checking on maps and all that. And so today I had to drive from North London to Rustington. And so what did I do? I stared at a smartphone and it says 2.2 miles, turn right, 1 mile left, go straight on 12. And I just like a monkey staring at the screen. And I've lost a lot of those skills of how to navigate, how to read maps, how to work out different routes and so on, because it all does it for me. And now that's just in one little area. The fear is that this is going to go across all our thinking processes, all our reasoning. We're going to lose those skills. And particularly this is a real concern for young people in education. That will they ever develop the kind of cognitive skills of persevering with difficult problems and challenging and trying to work out how to write an essay and so on, when you can just press a button? And the professor will never know. And so this has got a name now. It's called cognitive offloading. And it's a real worry that it's really a version of the Wall-E picture, isn't it, of what happens to human beings if we take away that stress. So yes, these are tools that can help us, but I would put out a health warning. If you're using this a lot, more than the odd occasion, if you're using this for hours every day, almost certainly it will have negative effects on your own thinking processes and your ability to reflect, and therefore we just need to be aware of the potential downside. What about jobs? Well, I think it's almost, this goes back to this disruption thing. I think it's almost inevitable. There is going to be massive disruption in many jobs, and particularly the irony is it's the white-collar jobs that are most at risk, rather than blue-collar, manual and semi-manual occupations. There's always going to be a need for plumbers and for electricians, But when it comes to the sort of jobs which people do sitting at a desk and using a computer, it seems almost inevitable that many of those jobs are going to change, and quite a lot of them will disappear, including a lot of STEM jobs, so science, technology, engineering, maths. A lot of those jobs, it turns out, the computers are very good at. So the optimists say, well, of course, there'll always be new jobs. You know, so for instance, the transition from this unbelievable change that happened between the horse and the internal combustion engine happened just in the space of about 10 years. And a whole load of jobs were instantaneously wiped out. All the jobs to do with horses, all the different aspects of requiring horses disappeared overnight. But a whole lot of new jobs to do with maintaining cars were suddenly created. And so the optimists say that's what's going to happen. We're going to have a whole wonderful new jobs to do with managing the computers and so on. But the pessimists say, actually, this time it's different, because if it's really about intelligence, and if we're hiring people, and actually, some of the people in Silicon Valley, they're already talking about a digital workforce, so that the idea is in a company, you would have some human beings, but you would also have hundreds of systems which were effectively the digital workforce, and who you could effectively employ. And of course, the problem with that is that effectively more money goes to the bosses and the investors, and a lot of people who previously could earn a decent job are going to find themselves out of work. And one of the scary things is that some of the people who've thought about this most, and these are the leaders of these companies in the States, the chief executives and the investors and so on, do you know what they're doing? They're building bunkers, and they're creating hideaways in New Zealand and other places as far away as possible, because they anticipate serious social unrest because of what might happen. So I don't know, and this comes back, I think, don't be afraid. It's all part of the drama. Somehow, I'm sure that there will be new employment possibilities, there will be new opportunities. One of the things I wonder is whether we've got to kind of re-engineer what volunteering is. So up until now, we've put a great deal of emphasis on work, on the importance of work, the dignity of work, the status of work, even the kind of spiritual significance of work. And we've seen unemployment as a great evil. But I think we need to start to think, are we really talking about paid employment? Is work the same as paid employment? Or would it be possible to find your dignity and meaning in unpaid employment? If your needs were being met in some other way, possibly by some kind of universal basic income, could it be possible for people to really find significance and value and meaning as a volunteer, as an unpaid? And maybe we should lose the phrase volunteer and find another less demeaning term. I don't know. I mean, I think we've never faced this kind of issue before. I think there are potentially, for those of us who are Christians, I think there's going to be a lot of pastoral fallout. I think there are going to be a lot of people who find themselves to be unemployable, and they're going to have to struggle with that sense of worthlessness and shame and being devalued, and or else they're going to have to change their whole employment quite radically. So I think there is going to be a lot of fallout, and therefore, again, a real role for the Christian community in trying to support those who are casualties of these enormous social changes.
Okay, thank you. John, you spoke quite a lot about your own experience, of course, from a medical perspective. So there's a question here that says, Will AI enable life expectancy to be extended into the hundreds of years? And is this a good thing?
Yeah, wow. Well, certainly there are a lot of people working on it. So one of the interesting things about Silicon Valley is that there are a whole series of elderly white men who are incredibly rich because they've made obscene sums of money through technology, and they are terrified of death. And therefore they are doing what they've always done, and that is throw money at the problem. And they are hiring and starting startups which are dedicating everything to life extension. Would it be possible to overcome death, to overcome the processes, the cellular processes which are going on in our bodies and leading to decay? And so what happens at the moment is that you start from nothing, you grow, you develop, everything is getting better and better, you're getting stronger, your brain is growing, you're making new connections, you're getting better and better and better, and then you hit 25. And from 25 onwards, you're on the long, slow downhill trend. And to begin with, there's cellular damage accumulating in your cells. There's debris, there's oxidative products, and so on. But to begin with, you can't see it. On the outside, everything looks fine. Then you start to see the wrinkles start to appear, the hair goes grey, the muscles go flabby, you go on and down and down and down. Eventually you die. And that's it. That's life. And so the idea is, if we could, we get here, and then maybe we could slow the decline a bit, and then we get another new stem cells, some new treatment, and then the decline goes. And then we get another, and then we get escape velocity, and actually we're now improving, and now we live forever. And that is genuinely a dream of the biologists. So what you should expect is the world is going to be increasingly populated by 300-year-old Silicon Valley wealthy people, while the rest of us are on the long, slow decline. And I don't think it's going to happen. And I think it's interesting, again, it's going slightly off a tangent, but it's an interesting tangent. So in the Bible, in the story of the Garden of Eden, there were two trees. There was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and there was the tree of life. And God told the first humans, Adam and Eve, that they could eat of any tree at all in the garden, whatever they liked, and there was only one tree that they should not eat of, and that was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And you all know what happened. And evil entered into the world. But then the interesting thing is that what the narrative says is that God drove them out of the garden and put an angel and a flashing sword to stop them getting back into the garden and eating the tree from the tree of life, because everybody who ate from the tree of life will live forever. And in other words, what that story teaches us is that to live forever in a fallen state is not a blessing. It's a curse. And it's interesting in the scriptures that death, although a terrible judgment and evil thing, actually God uses it as a way of limiting human evil. Because there are terrible evil people in this world, but the one thing we know, hallelujah, about the most evil people, they're going to die. That Putin and whoever else, the most evil people we can think of, the one thing that's going to happen is they're going to die and their evil is going to come to an end. Think how terrible if Putin got hold of the tree of life. and could carry on doing his evil purposes forever. So actually, death is one of those severe mercies in our fallen state that God allows. And I suspect that it's not going to be possible. Sorry, Silicon Valley entrepreneurs. They may be able to add the odd few years here and there, but the idea of them living forever, I suspect, is pure fantasy. Thank goodness. Thank God.
So this question is slightly different. It's a bit more, I think, about inequalities and access to the benefits. It says, are all the goodies only going to be available to those who can afford them? In other words, I guess, is it going to really be equitable, or will it exacerbate those differences?
Yes, I think that is a real worry. There's a real worry that, so for instance, if you're just ordinary Joe, you're going to have to, when it comes to healthcare, you're going to have to deal with the bots and the machines. If you're really rich, you could even see a human doctor, You could, a real human being, but it's only for people who've got the right insurance. So there's this real worry of a kind of two-tier society where, of a dehumanization that the machines will exacerbate divisions in society. I think that this is where there's to use a phrase, there's a democratic deficit. What is happening is that people are making decisions which are really going to affect our lives, but they're not the slightest bit interested in what we think about what's going to affect our lives. They've got their own agendas. And I think what we need to, as we look to the future, we need to find ways of overcoming that democratic deficit, of saying, we want to have a voice. These things are really important. We insist that we are involved in the decisions that are being made about tech and how it's being used. And in particular, we're very concerned about justice. I mean, Christianity has a very noble history of being concerned for the weakest, the most vulnerable members of society. In ancient Israel, they were the widows, the orphans, and the immigrants. And they were singled out because they were people of particular vulnerability. And God himself said, I am on the side. I am the defender of the widows and the orphans and the aliens. And my people should be defending them. So as we're thinking about AI, the question is, who are the widows and the orphans and the aliens? Who are the most vulnerable? Who are the most likely to be exploited? To be honest, an awful lot of those are young people. It's the Generation Z who are being massively exploited with websites like TikTok and social media and other things, which is a kind of digital heroin, which is just being distributed for free. So I think we, as older people, as people who have a voice, we need to think about how can we exert that voice. And there is a pushback starting to happen. It's happening among parents who are really pushing back on social media. I think there are a number of things that could be done if we just think about practical responses. And the first thing is to make really stringent age limits to protect young people. So it's not an accident that if you look across the world, 16 years of age is generally accepted as the very youngest age at which you're almost an adult. So 16 is an age, by and large, you're not allowed before 16 to drive a car, to drink alcohol, to give consent for sex, to go to war, to vote. And I think we should say, sorry, there's the water. I think we should say that you should not be allowed to have access to this kind of powerful technology until you're 16. And we should insist that that is rigorously enforced, just as alcohol or driving or voting is. And I think that would be the first base to try and protect children. They just don't have the emotional maturity to be able to cope with the power of this technology. The second really interesting idea, which I'm very much in favor of, and that's sometimes been called a Turing red flag. Alan Turing was one of the pioneers of AI. And a Turing red flag basically says, by law, a computer that is pretending to be human has to tell you repeatedly, I must remind you, I am not a human being, I'm not a real person, I'm simply a clever machine. Now, you all know that if you're seeing an advert about investments or banks or something like that, there's a whole spiel that comes on from the Financial Services Authority that investments may rise and fall and your house may be at risk and all those kind of things. And they have, by law, anybody who has an advert to do with investments has to say those reminders that you might lose your house. So why couldn't we have a law that says whenever you go onto ChatGPT, whenever it's pretending to be human, whenever you're not sure whether you're talking to a real human being, by law, the computer must say, I'm not real. I'm only faking it. I think that would actually make a huge difference. The companies would hate it. They will do everything they possibly can to prevent that, because that will destroy the illusion that they're trying to create.
Maybe just following up on that. I mean, I think this evening I've learned a lot more about artificial intelligence, but I also getting a sense that I'm quite powerless to influence it. So are there ways you would advise? Is it putting pressure on MPs, or is it getting involved in some sort of organisations that are involved in this, or supporting them financially? What could we do as individuals or collectively as churches or other organisations?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it's a really good question, and the truth is we're still only just at the beginning of this. And actually, to be honest, we're way behind. We're way behind the curve. But it's not hopeless. You know, I think the interesting thing is, if you were to raise the kind of questions I've raised about protections and justice and so on, I think across the country of the UK, there would be a vast majority of people who said, yeah, we agree with that. In other words, if it only was possible to get some kind of movement together, an agreement, I think we could have an immense political effect, because in the end, the politicians have to listen to what we think is important as the electorate. So I think the first stage is trying to move together. We're much more powerful together. If we're a lone voice, we can be dismissed. If we represent thousands and thousands of people, I think we can make a difference. I think we're just in the beginning of these kind of movements being created. And I think watch this space. And if you're interested, I could point you in directions of people who are starting to think about this. The most powerful movement has been with parents and smartphones, and that really is making a difference. But I'm really concerned about these AI companions and the way that people are going to be suckered into this weird kind of dependency on a fake machine.
Yes, thanks. Okay, a couple of other questions here. Can you see AI help humans to be free from pain? As a positive contribution.
Free from pain. Depends whether you're talking about physical pain or other forms of pain. I think I've been, as you heard, very involved in the debate about assisted suicide, whether we should legalize suicide for people in pain. And what I've realized is that there's a lot of misunderstanding about the nature of pain, and particularly about the nature of pain at the end of life. What most people seem to think is that pain, when people are in pain at the end of life, It's a kind of terrible physical agony, like a broken bone that is sort of grating. And there's just this horrific physical agony, and it's intolerable, and you're just crying out in pain and so on. That is not, well, that is one kind of pain, and that is called physical pain. But actually, it's not the most important kind of pain, because the truth is, what medics know is that physical pain is the easy pain. We've got amazingly powerful painkillers, and they work for physical pain. They can eradicate it, or virtually eradicate it. And I've seen many, many times how powerful painkillers do that. The problem is that there are other kinds of pain at the end of life. There is psychological pain, which is things like anxiety and depression and annoying kind of internal mental anguish. Then there's relational pain, where there are broken relationships, and there's a deep sort of agony because of relationships which are just broken. And then there's spiritual pain, which is to do with feelings of guilt or feelings of meaninglessness. And it's those kinds of pain that are far and away the most important kinds of pain, but they're also much more difficult to treat. But it's not hopeless. I mean, psychological pain can be treated with friendship, companionship, humanity. It can be treated with psychological treatment sometimes with psychotropic drugs, which like antidepressants or whatever. Relational pain can be treated by reconciliation, by restoring relationships. And spiritual pain can be treated with spiritual counseling and with spiritual support and pastoral care. So, yes, pain can be treated, but tragically, many, many people are dying in the UK in terrible pain. But it's not physical pain, by and large. It's these other kinds of pain which are not being met. Can AI address those kinds of pain? I'm not sure. I think in the end, it's this human to human. It can pretend, it can produce some kind of simulation, but it's not the real deal. And in the end, what we need is to be a human presence with people who are suffering. And I don't think that will ever replace. You know, the machine can say to somebody in terrible pain, you know, I know how you feel. Oh, that must be terrible. I'm here for you. But it's just words. But when a human doctor comes alongside, or a human carer, a nurse, a therapist, a pastor, a vicar, and they come alongside and they sit with you, you know, I as a doctor can say, I know what it means to be terrified. I know what it means to be in agony. I know what it means to lose someone who's very close to you. And I'm going to walk alongside you. And I'm not going to abandon you. And I'm going to be here for you. And I don't think that's what human beings, that's human solidarity. That's what we can do for one another. And no machine is ever going to replace that.
Okay, I think we've got time for perhaps just one or two more questions, because we will finish by 8, so a couple of questions. This one, DeepSeek is an open source AI which allows anyone in the world to download it and build with it. Does this mean the genie is out of the bottle for containing AI?
Yeah, so DeepSeek is a large language model which was produced by Chinese scientists. So it was believed previously that the Americans were way ahead of the Chinese. And then, to everyone's astonishment, the Chinese released a model which showed actually they were pretty close to the very best that the US was producing. And interestingly, the Chinese firm that did this, and they were not directly linked to the Communist Party, they were an independent firm, they took the decision of releasing the model with all the information about it. So it's what's called an open model. Most of the models, like ChatGPT, are commercially sensitive, and therefore you cannot obtain all the details about how ChatGPT is programmed. But there are these models that are released, and DeepSeek is one of them. It's not the only one, called an open model. And there's a big debate going on at the very moment between computer scientists as to which is more dangerous. Is it more dangerous to have the most powerful systems all kept secret, so we never really know what's happening or how good they are, and therefore at the same time China will be keeping its very best models secret? Or is it more dangerous to release it out into the wild, because then everybody can get hold of it and then use it and change it and modify it for whatever purposes they want? And it's a very complex, difficult debate. So at the moment, we seem to have both things going on. We're both having these very powerful open models, which people are taking and using, and criminals are using. And at the same time, there are the secret commercial models, which the laboratories are working on behind closed doors. And who knows what's going to be released next year.
Okay, so I think we'll take one more. Sounds like a big question, but I think it's a good one to finish on, and apologies to those that I've not managed to get through. And then I'm going to hand over to Desmond, who's the chair of Churches Together here, to close. So the last question: if AI goes out of control, who can fix it?
Well, some people have suggested the most important thing is that we've really got to persuade the super intelligent computer that we're cute. I mean, you don't want to get rid of us. I mean, we're no threat. We're quite fun to have around. Think of us like a sort of kitten. You may think I'm joking, I'm not. So some people seriously are postulating that this is the next phase of evolution. So, in fact, it's been suggested that we are what is called a biological boot code. So a boot code is a little program which runs when you switch on a computer. And what it does is it actually calls the main program. So a little program runs first, as soon as you press the start button, and that calls the big program which runs the computer. So the idea is that we are what evolution is using as a boot code. We are this sort of messy biological bit of code that does its stuff in order to get the really important program running, which is the AI. And of course, what happens once the boot code has done its job, it just stops, because it's now futile, pointless. And so some people are suggesting that's what we're here for in the universe. We are here to create life, artificial life, and that long after we've gone off, the machines that we make will be spreading across the galaxy and the cosmos, and they will be reproducing and taking intelligence and getting smarter and so on. Now that's science fiction, and I personally think it's wrong. And just to go back, why is it wrong? Because the word became meat. And therefore, our biology, our embodiment, is not just a kind of messy side effect. No, it's the whole point. And the big picture, the idea is that God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, from eternity past, were giving themselves to each other, the Father to the Son to the Father to the Spirit to the Father. And the love builds up, and the love builds up, and the love builds up, and then it goes boom, and that's the Big Bang. In other words, the universe is created, this whole physical universe is created out of the love, as a love gift from the persons of the Trinity. But then God's greater plan is actually to take this stuff which he has made and pull it into his own being. That's what the incarnation is. God stoops down into the creation and pulls it into himself. God himself is made out of the material of the creation. And then his plan is to do the same thing in our bodies. So bizarrely and wonderfully, the Christian faith teaches that our physical material bodies are going to be resurrected and transformed. And it says in the Bible, when he appears, we shall be like him because we shall see him as he is. So our own bodies are going to be transformed to become like the bodies of Jesus, the resurrected Jesus. And then after us is going to become the whole of the material creation. Animals and plants and trees and mountains and stars and galaxies, they're all going to be pulled through into the new heaven and the new earth. So our physical bodies, it appears, are part of the way in which God is going to transform the entire cosmos. That's why physicality matters.
That's a good point to finish on. Thank you, John.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, I was asked to thank John for his work tonight, and I think the applause we gave him at the beginning and the applause that we have given him now is enough evidence of our appreciation for your very good presentation tonight. I don't know what was in your mind when you came or signed up for this seminar, but certainly John has thrown a lot for us to think into our minds, and it's going to affect us. I know I started to shift uncomfortably in my seat when he talked about an elderly white man. Oh dear. Fortunately, I don't live in Silicon Valley, and I'm not obscenely rich. Quite the opposite. But these are things, we're going to have to go away and think about it. And one of the biggest questions is just that, what can I do? Because there's a sense in us of impotence, not having an influence, not having a voice. How will that voice come? What will it be? Will it be writing letters to our MPs? Will it be just, as John suggested, forming a movement that expresses the voice of humanity against the voice of cold mechanics? I don't know. But it's something you and I need to go away and think about. So thank you, John. We're delighted. And I want to thank again Chris, because he put in a lot of work. You know, I'm the chairman. I lead the committee. Very good. He did the work. Okay. So thank you, John. I think we should give him an applause too. And probably the most sincere applause there came from his wife, because living with him, she knew what he went through. And also want to thank the church here, for Natalie, and all the folk from the church who have attended us so well. Thank you very much indeed. And all of you for coming. So let's go away and revolutionize our world. Amen.
Desmond said, could I say a prayer? Which is, I can give it a go. Lord God, we thank you for John and for everything that he's shared with us tonight. Whether we're people of faith or not, these are issues which we're grappling with. So we pray you'll help us to go away from here this evening and be delighted in all that's good and challenge anything that is not. And we pray you'll bless our homes and bless us as we return to them. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you all very much. Safe journey home, and see you soon.